You know, when you've been studying the scripture for a long time and a particular thing you've been trying to find the answer to, and you have looked at scripture, you've prayed, and then like all of a sudden you see the answer. You think, well, why didn't I see it before? Well, I've had a moment like that. Now you may say, once I reveal to you what I'm going to say, you may say, well, I've heard that before. Well, see, I never heard that before. But through prayer and studying the scriptures, and it has to do with Peter cutting off the high priest or the high priest's servant's ear. Now that's where we're going to end up, and what I see in there. Now that particular action is covered in all four Gospels. Now we know in the Gospel they don't cover every single thing that the others cover. Sometimes you get something different. And like what Jesus said, you don't get the whole thing he said in each gospel. You know, John one time said that if everything Jesus had said and done was written down, he didn't think the books of the world or the whole world would hold the book. So from that aspect, we know it was a lot. So we have parts in the gospels. Now, what I want to do first, and what we're going to talk about is does Jesus expect us to be, passive? Now I'm going to take some scripture in Mark. In Mark chapter 15, verse 27, it says, "And they crucified him," Jesus. "They crucified him among two thieves, one on the right, one on the left. And the scripture was fulfilled, which said, he was numbered with the transgressors." Now I wanted to lead off with that. Now that's going to take us to Luke chapter 22, verse 35. And Jesus said, speaking to the disciples, he says, "And he said to them, when I sent you without purse and scrip and shoes, lacked you anything? And they said nothing. Then he said to them, but now he that hath a purse, let him take it, and likewise his scrip. And he that hath no sword, let him sell his garment and buy one." Now a lot of people dismiss that, but you can't dismiss it. And he goes on to say, now this is why I read Mark first. He says, Jesus says, "For I say unto you, that this which is written must be accomplished in me." And he quotes it, "And he was reckoned among the transgressors. For the things concerning me have an end." So he is saying that which was prophesied about me, that I'll be reckoned among the transgressors. And Mark tells us that is the scripture that was fulfilled when he was crucified between the two thieves. So you could read that, and I've heard people try to do some strange things with that. But Jesus was saying, you buy a sword for what was written about me is going to happen. I'm going to be crucified. Ultimately, I say, prepare yourself. Now, let's get in now to where Jesus cuts the high priest's servant's ear off. And let's go to Luke first. Like I said, that particular instance is covered in all four Gospels, but we don't get the full account in each one. Now, in Luke, here's what Jesus said immediately after Peter did that. And said, Jesus answered and said, "Suffer ye thus." He said, "Suffer ye thus far," and he touched his ear and healed him. So he healed the high priest's ear. He was saying to them, allow that, to the disciples, allow this. Now, what's the significance of that? We'll see a little more about it. Let's look at John now. John chapter 18. And that was in chapter 22 of Luke, if I didn't mention it. It says, "Now then Simon Peter drew a sword and smote the high priest's servant, cut off his ear. And then said Jesus unto Peter, Put up your sword into its sheath." Now we find out some other things that Jesus has said. He said, "The cup which your Father hath given me, shall I not drink it?" Okay, so we know he said, allow this to happen to his disciple. And he's asking Peter directly, he says, "Shall I not drink the cup which the Lord has given me?" Now let's back on up. Let's hit Mark. And it's all about he drew. Now Peter's not mentioned by name in each gospel, but we know who it is. It says, so Peter cuts the ear off. And here's what Jesus says immediately. "And Jesus answered and said to them, Are you come out as against a thief with swords and with staves?" He doesn't even mention Peter and the sword. Okay, he doesn't even mention it. Now he goes directly to the crowd. Now here's the one which has been used a lot and the verse we're going to talk about, this is Matthew chapter 26, verse 51. And again, Peter, he draws his sword out and cuts the ear off. And Jesus says to Peter, "Put up again thy sword in its place, for they that take the sword shall perish by the sword. Think you that I cannot now pray, and the Father will send 12 legions of angels?" He said, "But the scripture must be fulfilled." Now he's talking, you get a fullness of what he is saying, what he has said. All the pieces, you put all the pieces together. Now here's where we're going to focus in on that. Now some people quote that scripture, "He who lives by the sword." That's not what it says. It doesn't say, "He who lives by the sword." Jesus said, "He who takes the sword." Now that has been used to say that you are to be a passive person now. Now you've got a major doctrine here. A major, let's just call it a shift in what we are to believe that from what they believed previous to this. You see, now Peter's wearing a sword, and there was someone else in his group had a sword. He was wearing a sword to draw the sword. And Jesus had told them earlier in Luke to purchase a sword. So what does this now mean? Well, when you say, "He who lives by the sword," that messes it up. Just forget that. This says, "He who takes the sword." What was he saying? I mean, once you see it, it's so simple. He said, and what he said afterward, he says, "Shall I not? Do you think I cannot call legions of angels?" This is all he's saying. He says, "Peter, put up your sword. If you draw your sword here, if you're going to fight here and now, you're going to die here and now." And immediately he says, because immediately after he tells him, he who takes the sword shall perish. Do you not think I can deliver myself? He's talking about this moment. This is no doctrinal shift. And one point I was going to make, if it was, the other Gospels don't even mention it. They don't even mention the language after he said put the sword up. Some don't even mention it at all. They don't even talk. They don't even address Peter at all in it, because it's not a new doctrine. It's not a new doctrine that you can't protect yourself, that you can't go armed. Peter, if you do this now, put your sword up. If you take up the sword, you're going to die by the sword. See, the crowd had swords, had swords with them. That's all it was. I mean, and as I said, when you start translating that verb, "He who lives by the sword," then you sort of give it some other life that's not there. Say, "Peter, put your sword up. This has to happen. Let it happen. Do you think I cannot deliver myself, Peter?" He immediately says that after he says, "Who takes up the sword shall die." Now, once you understand that, now one thing I was going to mention first, but I didn't. Jesus wasn't passive. Now, when Jesus went into the temple, he didn't have a sword with him, but he went in there and he had a whip, and he forcibly threw them out, overturning their tables. That's not what pacifists do. That's not what they do at all. But you have to deal with that. If you want to understand Scripture, you got to deal with it all. What I've told you before, all Scripture has to work together. You can't separate it. You can't have something that says one thing and something over here that says something else, and they don't agree. They will agree. They will agree. Jesus had no problem with Peter having the sword. When Peter drew that sword and cut the high priest's servant's ear off, he said, "Put it up. If you're planning on fighting here," I'm paraphrasing now. If you're going to fight now, you're going to die now. I can deliver myself, Peter. I have come to this point to go to the cross. He said, later on he tells Pilate, "If my kingdom was of this world, then will my servants fight." See, Peter he didn't need Peter to fight for him right there, because his kingdom was not of this world. But neither did he turn Peter into a pacifist. We can protect ourselves. We can stand up for ourselves. And there is no change. There is no change previously to that. You could defend yourself. Now you can defend yourself. Now I hope that makes sense to you.